Good evening, friends, and a very warm welcome from SAMVAD to Monday Moods with SAMVAD. As many of you are aware, SAMVAD is a national initiative for child protection, mental health, and psychosocial care. We are located at the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and supported by the Ministry of Women and Child Development, the Government of India. Each month, we bring you Monday Moods with SAMVAD on the second and fourth Monday between 8 and 9:15, but we are hoping to push that timing back for everyone's convenience starting next month. Monday Moods, friends, was started as an initiative to help us consolidate, strengthen, and further build our knowledge and networks in child and adolescent mental health, to creating a movement on child mental health, so that we come together on this platform to share various ideas, initiatives, and discourses that we believe would be useful to our professional practice and research. This is the second session of Monday Moods. The first one that we did a couple of weeks ago was entitled Landscapes of Child and Adolescent Mental Health. Today's session is titled Child and Adolescent Mental Health, the Fallacies of Globalization. We have our very own Dr. Shekhar Sheshadri to chair this session. Dr. Shekhar is former senior professor, Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, NIMHANS, also former Dean Behavioral Sciences and former director, NIMHANS. He continues, after initiating SAMVAD, to be an advisor to us. We bring you this session with two eminent speakers from the field of child mental health. We have with us, and please welcome, Dr. Nishant Goyal, Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the Central Institute of Psychiatry in Ranchi, another very, very eminent institute in psychiatry and over 100 years old. Dr. Nishant, we are delighted to have you with us today. Dr. Nishant is in charge for the Center of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, Brain Stimulation, and Cognitive Neurosciences. He does a lot of research in the fields of clinical child and adolescent psychiatry, brain stimulation, cognitive neuroscience, and forensic psychiatry. He was very keen today to speak on issues of globalization and the impact of child and adolescent mental health. And he is joined by Dr. Isha Sharma, who is assistant professor at the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry at NIMHANS. Dr. Isha has a wide range of expertise in multiple areas of work and research in child psychiatry, psychopathology, neuropsychiatry, childhood obsessive compulsive disorder, pervasive developmental disorders, to name a few. So without further ado, and with a warm welcome to our two speakers once again, and of course to our chair, let me hand this session over to Dr. Shekhar.
Thank you very much, Sheila. And as you know, friends, it is my honor to have two champions of child mental health on this session of Monday Moods, Nishant Goyal and Isha Sharma. Now, let's begin with the basic premise. When we speak about fallacies of globalization, or as Isha would title it, the myth of globalization, what are we saying? Are we saying globalization is a fallacy? Or are we saying that the impact of globalization on mental health, and in the context of today's session, that the impact of globalization on child mental health is a fallacy? Now, there is globalization and there is global mental health. You'll remember last time when John spoke on landscapes, we refer to the whole issue of global mental health, which really looks at how parenting practices vary in the global north and the global south. What are the manifestations of trauma and adverse childhood experiences in different places in the world, particularly where there is conflict? So global mental health is really about these kind of region-specific, culture-specific commonalities and differences in child mental health manifestations and public child mental health approaches to treatment and intervention. Globalization, on the other hand, refers to a whole set of phenomena that civil society has been debating and agitating and cogitating about for many years now. So the whole market economy, liberalization, globalization, what does it do to public psyche? What does it do to consumer behavior? What does it do to people's needs, children's needs? And has it made a difference in the way that child development actually plays itself out? Now, if you look at a category such as internet gaming disorder, would it be right to say that the whole gaming industry, which is part of the globalization reality, is actually an outcome or a result of globalization, that we have created a disorder? Or would other forms of behavioral addictions even have occurred even if this kind of technology hasn't taken place? So you see, it's a very complex and interesting area to really speak about, as particularly as we emerge from the pandemic, and what globalization has to offer or not, as the case may be, in the next 1 or 2 years, as we truly understand the long-term mental health impact of the pandemic. So this is really the background in which we're going to start the proceedings today. It's almost going to be in a debate form, friends. So we're going to start with Nishant first. Let's assume for hypothetical purposes that he may speak for or against the issue of fallacy. And we will then have Isha providing a rebuttal. I will then facilitate an argument between the two, and then take a couple of questions from the audience and some final parting eminent speakers to close the session today. I intend to close the session at about 9:10, as I have another session to start at 9:30, and I need some preparation for that. So with those words of introduction, my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to first invite Dr. Nishant Goel of CIP Ranchi to address you first. Nishant, Fallacies of Globalization and Child Mental Health. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. I hope you can hear me. Yeah. So just give me a moment so that I can share my screen with all of you. I'm sure.
Very clearly, Nishant. Thank you.
So, thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank Shekhar sir, Sheila, Kriti, Arvind, and the entire team of Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry NIMHANS for having me in Monday Moods with Samvad. As sir was hypothetically speaking that what I'll be talking about, yes, I will be talking about, I'll be talking for the fallacies of globalization, which are actually causing, significant impact on the health, particularly the mental health of children and adolescents. I would like to, disclose that I don't have any conflict of interest or any financial disclosures leading to this particular presentation. As we all know, there's a proverb in Sanskrit called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is a family. So whether we see this world, in a 3-dimensional or a 360-degree angle, or the world on a piece of paper, like a 2-dimensional figure, we do see this world when we see ourselves as a product or a byproduct of globalization, as a person where a lot of things are made in India, Japan, China, so on and so forth. So what exactly globalization is? we have to first understand what globalization is. The definition of globalization says it's a process. It's a process of interaction and integration among people, companies, governments, society of various nations through either the trade or investment or human resources and exchange of knowledge. For us as health professionals or mental health professionals, human resources and knowledge exchange is one of the major factors which impact, the effects of globalization. As the world is changing, uh, globalization is bringing about benefits along with us, with some challenges as well. The challenges in terms of advent of mass media, travel becoming so easy and simple, the impact of consumerism, using computers, multinational corporations, and somehow it is actually affecting the mental health. But I'm not going into the details of how health, but I'll focus more on how it is impacting or affecting the mental health. More so the mental health of children and adolescents. Why? Because we know most of the psychiatric disorders, they start in early childhood or adolescence. And if we do, or if we work towards prevention and early intervention, we can prevent a lifetime of suffering and disability. We all know that there are intertwined contributions of various psychosocial, economic, political, cultural, religious, and community variables when it comes to, mental health issues or development of mental health problems. Now, I just wanted to show you this particular slide where there are some facts. I'll not go into the details of this. I'm sorry, this is a very crowded slide. But like, for example, it says that around 1 in 25 to 19-year-old people have some behavioral problems. This has come in National Health Services of the United Kingdom in 2018. They also say in 2020 that 1 in 6 school-age children, they have some or the other mental health problem. So you can just see the impact, how mental health is actually engulfing and impacting our young population. Just talking about how it is, working in our setup. If you see, I always show this slide to see the impact of health utilization. It says that in 2008 we were seeing around 5,000 patients in our child psychiatry OPD. 2017 it rose to around 3 times. It is 11,000 patients we are seeing. Before the pandemic struck in 2019, close to 20,000 patients were seen in our child psychiatry OPD at CIP. So how does globalization affect children and adolescents? Unfortunately, very little explicit attention is given to the process. And today I'll be talking a little bit about the process, how globalization is affecting the mental health. Children are seen as social concepts when it comes to, the historical context or the political context. And I'm sure we all will, agree to this, that children or childhood is not insulated from the global politics of everyday life. I'm sure we can have, discussion on what does global politics of everyday life means, but it is a very, very important factor. And the current global processes are actually transforming how our social relationships are, shaping up, how our identities are changing, including that too, which is happening in childhood. As I was saying, the process. Now, when we talk about the process of globalization affecting mental health, I'll use these 5 M's, or the 5 M's means the process of marginalization, marketization, medicalization, militarization, and mobilization. I'll try to briefly touch upon these 5 M in my subsequent slides. First, talking about marginalization. We all know and we all agree that inequality is a powerful mediator of distress and dissatisfaction among human beings. And Shekhar sir, in all his presentation, he talks about how it actually affects the health or the mental health of children in our community. Well-being of poorer children has always been marginalized in the contemporary political or economic world. People, the so-called neoliberal people or the neoliberal strategies, They have further heightened the disparities between the rich and poor. And this pandemic, take my words, has further deteriorated the situation. It has worsened, the difference between rich and poor. It has been found in various studies as well, just done across the world. We all know that booming of private sector, though it is making our life easier, but at the same time, it is causing significant disparities in the service utilization. The second M, which is marketization. Again, this is, in my understanding, this is one of the most important and significant factors when it comes to parenting or the effect of parenting on the health of children. Parenting has become anxiety driven, where narcissistically predetermined views of modern childhood are seen by the parents of the children. And through combined anxieties and technologies, we want to give the best to our children, and that makes us anxious. And the advances in technologies which are available to us, parents with good economic resources are drawn towards such strategies and devices which they think that they can protect their children from the threats. How they use surveillance cameras at home, the activities are so supervised, and the ever-present cell phone. Things are like, there are two more things which are coming up in this marketization, called commodification or McDonaldization. I'll tell what it means all about. First of all is commodification or the categorization. What is happening these days is that the mental or the emotional and behavioral states or the deviances are becoming categories and brand. And each brand has a market which includes professionals like us and treatments like a particular therapy or a particular set of medicines which is available. People seek out a product. They don't ask for help. They ask for whether to confirm a diagnosis through an expert or the treatment. And how do they do this? By the ever lasting Google. We all know how Google is affecting, or it has started to affect, our health and our life related to health. Now, what is McDonaldization? It's a very interesting concept which has been talked about by anthropologists these days. It basically stems from seeking quick relief and satisfaction. I'm sure all of you must have experienced ordering a burger at one of the McDonald's or any fast food restaurant around you. Now, what is happening that we are viewing children's poor behavior as a distressed emotional state, which is caused by an illness. And because we know that there are medicines which are available, so what we do, we don't understand what is happening. What we do with very little training, very little knowledge or understanding, we just go ask for a quick fix solution, and gradually we become used to of that quick fix solution, like the way we become used to of ordering a burger from McDonald's. And this is causing something called medicalization. Now, what medicalization is doing is, there is a proliferation of diagnostic categories. I'm sure many of you who are working, in the clinical setup, how DSM-5 diagnosis and how ICD-10 diagnosis are changing. They're actually naming, classifying the pathologies of childhood. Irritability is now given a diagnosis called DMDD, or disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. A quiet and shy child is, very commonly, when two parents are talking with each other, the first one will say, my child is very shy, maybe he's autistic. So see how recklessly we are using these terms, when we are talking about the behaviors or the activities of children around us. Simple, either binging on a food or refusing to food is labeled as eating disorder. DSM-5, as I said, they are turning grief into depression, medical illness into somatization, forgetfulness into mild neurocognitive disorder, passions into behavioral addictions. People who are passionate about exercise, who are passionate about losing weight, now they say that they are suffering from behavioral addictions. So we are gradually medicalizing things. We are creating more and more diagnosis, which is further, causing difficulties in, or maybe they're causing mental health issues. And when it comes to And that is a new concept, which is, it's not that new, but I would say around 8 or 10 years old concept, which is called disease mongering in psychiatry, or disease mongering in mental health. And you would be surprised to know, when a drug called atomoxetine was made in America, the diagnosis of ADHD was increased by 4 times, 400%. Like every second or third child was diagnosed with ADHD, just to provide them, just to market the pill, they were making the child ill. People are seeing life problems as chemical imbalance, and like so on and so forth. Then a little bit about militarization. What does militarization mean? It means that we are seeing, our children or young people, we don't trust them. We see them with with an eyes of a suspect. They are made to pass through metal detectors. There are CCTV around them. People are now putting CCTVs at home also. People are doing random drug testing in school. It's not happening in our country, but it is happening in Europe and other places. So what the problem, what it is causing is, we are losing the practice which focuses on engagement, relationship building, and actually trying to understand the potential of a young child. And that is what globalization is causing to us. Then finally, the last M, which is nothing but mobilization. With the use of media projects, children are using, children are more and more using, media to tell their stories, to criticize the systems, to making connections using Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They don't talk to each other. They don't talk to, people. Children these days, they don't talk to the child next door. Rather than, they would spend time connecting with a person who is 300 kilometers away from them. And it is further worsened by something called acculturation, things where people are migrating from one area to other. And we all migrate, but how it is affecting the childhood, again, it is a major question which we should ask each other. And when we compare this between East and West, the belief system, the culture, they're largely contrasting. We all know that children in the West, they are different from children in the East. We are from the East. So emotional insecurity, conflicts, competitiveness, it is very commonly seen in the children of West. And as contrast to the West, in Eastern, world children, they are more individualistic. They have different views of social ties, social networks, community, joint family system, or extended family system. And what we are doing, we are trying to rear our children, exporting the Western beliefs. And this is creating a sense of ambivalence. And all these things are basically what Shekhar sir was just talking about, are the byproducts of globalization. And mind it, these are facts, no fiction. When we are now talking that our children are suffering from cyberbullying, trolling, stalking, behavioral addictions, suicide, self-harm, we all know about all these things. So I'll finish my part. I'll not finish my part. I'll finish my discourse about the fallacies of globalization with a view from above, where we all are talking that new colonialism, which is coming as a fallacy of global economic organization. So we were colonized before, but don't you think that we are colonized now also? We are becoming, slave to technology, slave to social media, so on and so forth. Our political, health, and social problems, they have direct impact on children's mental health. And does just talking about children's right is the answer to all lacunae? This is the question I would like to pose to Dr. Isha and everyone around, in today's presentation. With the use of DSM-ICD, are we missing the bus? Does mental health, when it comes to mental health, the medical model of mental health is increasing the stigma? But when you see the globalization, the impact of globalization for below, it is actually giving us opportunities. Apart from creating paradoxes, new fusions of identities, beliefs, and practices are coming, though the value systems are contradictory. But at the same time, it is giving us a chance to provide some innovative solutions using cross-cultural identities. So I thought that I'll tell this later, but I'll complete this, that we all have a global responsibility to transcend our cultural and political boundaries. We should identify childhood disorders as psychiatric problems as international public health crisis. We have to understand that, and this pandemic has further heightened the need for doing this. We should start addressing issues in more comprehensive way, not always from a corporate eye. And we should try to collaborate with our colleagues from across the world to pursue common goals. Thank you once again, Team SAMVAD and Team NIMHANS, for giving me this opportunity. Over to you, Shekhar sir. Thank you. This is CIP Ranchi, where I'm working. Just a glimpse of my institute. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nishant. There are some very provocative notions that have been raised here. Please mark 3 of the critical things that have been said here. Childhood has changed, parenting has changed as a byproduct or as a side effect that are embedded in the shift. What 10 years or 20 years ago would be part of the normal developmental range and going ahead, when we speak of the East or the West, or even the global North and the global South, the fact that are we transitional cultures, and is that a manner in which the whole thesis of today's subject really needs to be argued and debated.
Yes, sir.
Now, if you look at the whole situation of children growing up in conflict, and if you were to attribute globalization as a cause for that kind of conflict, particularly armed conflict, but the truth, my friends, is that a conflict has always existed 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Absolutely. It is just that the technology of armamentarium has changed. But another very interesting issue that Nishant has raised, and in fact, many of you, I'm sure, would be getting this as forwards. It's doing the rounds all over. It's called publication addiction. And this is a paper that appeared someone who's quoting from the British Journal of Dermatology about how many citations are there, what is, and to be known, it's like an addiction. And is this really part of the pressures to really fit into funding systems, into international collaboration? So it's a very interesting thesis that Nishant has raised. That let's listen to what Isha has to say when she counters some of the hypotheses that Nishant has propounded, when she shifts the word fallacy to the use of the word myths of globalization. Isha, over to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Just going to take a moment to share the screen. Great. So very good evening, everyone. Thank you, Shekhar sir, for inviting me to speak in this forum. This is both an opportunity as well as perhaps a really big challenge that I've faced in the recent times, because we'll usually be talking about only psychiatry. So this is very, very different from that. But I'm very happy to be doing this. So yes, I'm going to actually challenge not just that the fallacies exist or not exist, but that does globalization really exist, right? So the myth of globalization. Aristotle said, if you want to understand anything, observe its birth and development. And in my presentation today, in the first few slides, that's what I'm going to try and do. I'm going to try and take you through the history of globalization and then see what sense we can make of whether or not globalization really exists. So, but before that, I am not an economist or any other globalization related or created professional. So I have absolutely no technical backing on this. These are all impressions of a lay person like anybody in the audience today. And I'm just trying to interpret what this could mean for mental health, which is the profession where all of us come from. However, the moment Dr. Nishant sent across this topic, I think since then I've been wearing this debater hat from back in high school. So apologies a priori if I sound too brash or try to make some points a little too strongly. That's just me in another lifetime. So what is globalization? Are we there yet? Dr. Nishant made a wonderful definition of globalization, but let's see where this comes from. So back in 1983, perhaps the first actual essay written on globalization was by Theodore Levitt, and he basically spoke about globalization of markets. And probably this literature, like many that followed it, has a lot to do with why we are so predisposed to looking at globalization from the economic financial industry lens. Because there is a much wider definition of globalization, which actually talks about the compression of the world, the intensification of the connections, within the world. So even within the definition that Dr. Nishant used, I can actually spot both of these aspects. So on the one hand, there is the process of interaction and integration among people, companies, and governments. But hey, we're just talking about this happening through economic means. So obviously our entire bias in what economy is doing and how that is impacting everyone, is probably stemming from something like this. So what are these other aspects of globalization? We're familiar with industry and finance, and that seems to be creating a lot of havoc. But what about political globalization? Are we globalized in terms of political systems? Are we globalized in terms of informational exchange? Are we globalized culturally? I think a lot of what Dr. Nishant also said, adds validity to this, that no, we're not. Even if we leave aside politics and culture, even information exchange seems to be highly localized and loco-regionally driven, right? I'm sure a lot of you know that the Google search engine doesn't operate in exactly the same way across nations. China doesn't even permit the Google search engine. So information flows are also heavily biased by our larger realities, which are way beyond economics and industry. So if we look at how globalization actually came about, from the pre-World War I stage to the present times, mind you, there was also archaic globalization. So, primitive civilizations, the Indus Valley, Mesopotamia, Egypt, there was, cultural exchange, goods exchange happening even back then. But the documented history of globalization starts around pre-World War I, which is where, actually pretty much around the same time that the East India Company came to India. And East India Company, as you all know, was a private trading firm, and they started trading in goods. Then globalization 2.0, where governments started looking at goods as a profitable thing. And, they started saying that, hey, why should this be privately held? Government's going to regulate what happens in terms of trade. And slowly we moved to not just trading manufactured goods, but actually manufacturing overseas, so further economy expansion. And more recently, we're talking about services. We're talking about telemigration, right? So, and Dr. Nishant spoke about the benefits of research, and that's actually a good point. So I can collect my research data here, somebody in France can manage it, and somebody in the UK can access and analyze it. Right. So this is services trading, which is the current globalization era that we're in. But having said all that, we're still stuck with primarily, right. So, but before that, we have shifted from what we make to what we do, right? So it's not just about goods any longer. It's about our entire beings, all of our professions can be potentially globalized. So, but we're still in the industry finance realm. We still haven't touched upon politics, information, and cultural globalization. So, what industry and financial globalization have done for us, that is where the problem lies. And that's, in fact, the key point that I'm trying to make through my presentation. So we know that this kind of globalization, more people are employed by national and international companies. There is a relative reduction of poverty, even though there is an increase in capitalism, increase in consumerism. There is a lot of convergence. I don't want to say Western, but advertised models, right? So everybody is mongering for what they can see on the big, small, hand-sized screen. There is a lot of awareness about other cultures existing, about other kinds of politics existing. I'm recently reading Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land, and that politics, it just looks like from another world, from what we hear going on around us. So we're aware that other kinds of existences exist, but we have limited insights into how they really function because we are not truly globalized. On the other hand, there are some windows into actually globalized consciences that we've all actually been part of. There are some images I'd like to show you. The French team winning the FIFA World Cup with very few French origin players. You're all familiar with Fridays for Future, the anti-racism movement, which is across the globe. Stuff like the Me Too movement, democracy, that really strong countries and governments are made of. So these are examples of political, social, cultural, globalized consciences, which we have too little of in the face of the very, very magnanimous presence of economic globalization. And one wonders that if these two were to be at par, what would then that mean in terms of the impacts of globalization? So, Dr. Nishant, to take you on the 5 processes that you spoke about, marginalization, marketization, medicalization, militarization, and mobilization, let me give this a shot. Marginalization. I completely accept there is an exaggeration of social realities, which has an impact on mental well-being. But how much of this is a result of the disbalance between economic and socio-cultural globalization? Because how come, even though we access everything material, from foreign countries, we don't really talk about inclusive societies, social securities, taxation laws which are at par with income? That's not the conversation that we ever have when we look at marginalization. We only talk about the capitalist and consumer, but these are the two things that balance each other out, actually. Marketization, McDonaldization. Quite honestly, when I tried to understand the concepts that you've put forth, and I saw that McDonaldization is about efficiency, it's about control, it's about predictability, I was actually wondering, what else would progress look like? I think from the time that man discovered that striking 2 stones can make fire, from that time onwards, we have basically tried to make ourselves more efficient, more in control, more predictable, more calculatable, so that's, and everything that is, that has these characteristics is what is going to, supersede the markets. So I'm a little bit, in a conundrum here because it looks like progress cannot happen without these characteristics. But there is a catch to this, and which is that evolutionary dynamics or the behavioral mechanisms of change don't operate in linear mechanisms, right? So whereas on the one hand, you do get a lot of convergence. So no matter whether you're riding a bicycle in the busy streets of Bangalore or in China, if McDonald's works, it works everywhere. So yes, there is a lot of emulation of the fittest designs, but at the same time, evolution is always about competition. It is about co-evolution. It is about adapting. So what that means is that whenever there is a group change, it creates a lot of selection pressure on every other group that exists, right? So no matter how much McDonald's comes in, there is always going to be chaat houses. There is always going to be masala dosas. You can take a man out of, or a woman out of the village, but you cannot take the village out of the person. right? So behavioral mechanisms of change usually, run through these pros and cons before actually, coming to some final stage of existence. And I'm going to support this argument by the fact that several marketized products were actually demarketized. And what came to the rescue? Globalized consciousness came to the rescue, right? So Coca-Cola went out. How many celebrities now come in Coca-Cola ads? Do the ads even appear? Fair and Lovely, something that again was taken up by so many Bollywood stars, but no, didn't sustain globalized consciousness, right? And it had to, be put back. Medicalization. Again, this is a point that I agree with you in that a lot of medicalized disorders today are born out of urbanized nuclear living. They are born of jobs in globalized systems. They are born of capitalist motivations, right? So I completely succumb to that point, because anything that seemingly runs in patterns, and by patterns, I mean, it seems to have causes, strategies, consequences. So anything that runs in patterns, we tend to, pick it up and say, hey, is that something I can do something about? Can I break the pattern in any way? But let's pause here for a moment and think about, why are you arguing this has something to do with globalization when actually there is a more proximate cause, and which is that we are so preliminary in our mechanistic understandings of the brain. The moment causes are identified for diseases, and there are ample examples of this: tuberculosis, leprosy, so many disorders like this, where the moment a cause is found, the disease gets destigmatized, it gets a specific treatment. There is, a true medicalization in that sense. So how much of this is actually because brain functions, normal versus abnormal brain functions? That is where the problem lies. So unless we figure that out, we can keep jumping about whether which disorder should exist and which isn't. And again, there are ample examples of the fact that disorders have come into the DSM, gone out of the DSM, homosexuality being a good example, so where it's sometimes a lack of understanding that, contributes to how things function than merely social processes, so it's a more biological origin rather than a global economy origin. I sought to make this point, but how much of the medicalization is struggles of a field grappling to reiterate its place, right? So is psychiatry actually trying to look at too much because, there is little that we understand? But having said that, there are globalized science efforts that have led to understanding of biology. Consortia like this just wouldn't have been possible without a globalized connectivity. And a wonderful example of this published last year in the New England Journal of Medicine, where the understanding from the Human Genome Project actually led to the discovery of a genetic disorder in a month-old baby, and led to life-saving treatment. So without globalization, without the putting together of all this information and scientific data on a common platform and analyzing, how do you expect strides like this to move ahead? Finally, your point about militarization and mobilization, and how children are actually bearing the brunt of what we believe is progress. Again, technology does facilitate the core tenets of progress, which are control and predictability. But I have another angle to this, and which is that what we believe, or maybe what Dr. Nishant and I believe to be normal childhood, where is that coming from? Is there really a static normal? Or has the normal actually always been dynamic and evolving depending upon larger social realities of the world? So I actually did some very insightful reading. Childhood actually has evolved through very, very different and in fact troubling conceptualizations over time. And it really shook me to know that the first declaration of the rights of the child is something is of our generation. It's 20th and 21st century, right? So it's as recent as this that we have actually been looking at childhood the way we are fighting for it to exist in the future, right? So, and similarly, schooling has also evolved, through many, many twists and turns. So actually the current, the so-called curricula-based schools where students are expected to, do certain amount of portions, give exams, demonstrate certain competencies. All of this again actually arose in war-ridden Prussia, after defeat in a big war that they fought. And that's actually where the Prussian leaders thought, let's force everybody into learning the same thing. Let's teach them what we want them to believe. That is what's going to give our state a really good bunch of people to fight for the country. And then of course it has evolved to currently the kind of models of learnings that we want to take forward, which is more about personal, interaction based, experience based. The students choose what they want to learn, etc. So our concepts of normality, our concepts of what is going to work are always evolving. They are always dynamic. So we have to keep this facet in mind, even as we blame globalization for everything that's going wrong, because you don't know what the impact of this interconnectedness is going to have on childhood and how children emerge from these kind of realities. All in all, goals of education to make good people, to develop talents, etc. But what we're saying is that as societies change, schools change in terms of what they should be doing for society. So in conclusion, globalization is a myth. We're not truly globalized in all aspects. Ayam nijah paro veti ganna laghu chetsam udar charita nam tu vasudhaiv kutumbakam. A wonderful piece of writing, but the world is not yet one family. We're trying to be, but we're not there yet. What this means for mental health: globalization is an important determinant, a social determinant of mental health, but economic and technological globalization adversely impact socio-culturally non-globalized minds. The resulting cultural dissonance is what affects mental well-being. So in our work as mental health professionals, this is where we should be placing our energy, in terms of helping people feel more integrated in terms of their cultural belongingness and their understanding of, how systems around them work. Thank you very much for your very patient listening.
Thank you very much, Isha. Before I invite Nishant and invite Isha thereafter for a 2-minute rebuttal to what Nishant has to say, let me say 6 things very quickly on the basis of the ideas that Isha has presented. See, when she started talking about the whole economics of it all, it is very surprising, friends, that despite the pandemic, the stock market is robust. Buland hai stock market. Second, when we are talking about a universalization, globalization, let's say, in terms of how democratic principles actually function, my question to you is, how democratic is the family really? Third, when we look about taxation, and Oro, the host has stopped my video. Can you deal with it, please?
Dr. Shekhar, I think it's because there seems to be a connectivity issue on your side. So it may be better to have your video off. Your voice has been very in and out. So I think that's why.
The third, as far as taxation is concerned, is if you look at countries like Norway, where taxation rates are exceedingly high, the state-run welfare systems are 5-star. Whereas, state-run welfare institutions, are so paternalistic in many other places. And this really brings us to what Paulo Freire spoke about as conscientization. Does conscientization occur along with the principles or the processes of globalization? Finally culminating in the whole issue of schooling, and is the National Education Policy 2020 in line with the thesis that both the speakers have presented? And where do the fault lines, or the word that Isha used is dissonance, where do the fault lines lie, and how do we reconcile this in the interest of the mental health of the children that we seek to assist? Nishant, 3 minutes, your rebuttal, your time starts now.
Thank you, sir. So yes, definitely, I do agree with the fact that economic or the political globalization or the political effect does it does has a role when we talk about the impact of globalization. When I was talking about the concept of marketization, and like when you were talking about how you were trying to put your views towards understanding things like McDonaldization, I was basically trying to talk about the engagement. See, with all the process of making things easier, quicker, and simpler, are we actually not trying to work upon or tone down the process of engagement, which a child or the development of a child is very, very important. We have been talking about it every Saturday and Sunday, about how to engage with the child, how to communicate with the child. And we see in our own houses, in our own families, how much time do we give to our children, our adolescents, how do we engage with them. So making life simpler and easier is coming with a cost. This is my first point, which basically I wanted to make. Yes, I completely agree with the fact that globalized consciousness is actually playing a role when it is coming to understanding the after effects or the aftermath of marketization. We are working towards that, but still, ma'am, there is a long way to go. It has just started, and we don't need people like Greta Thunberg or some person coming out of the blue talking about things, and that person is made a hero universally. And when it comes to the term, using the term universe, I think when Shekhar sir talks about universalization, I think it is more understandable a concept when it comes to health or mental health. When we try to understand the impact of what is happening around us, maybe economically or socially or culturally. Yes, definitely, I agree that when you make the statement that the normal is always dynamic and evolving. But at the same time, if we don't understand and we are not aware of the after effects or the aftermaths of the processes around us, we are going to miss the bus. And as you said that it's a myth. You believe that globalization is a myth, but I'm sure that globalization is gradually going beyond the realms of politics or economics, and it has entered in our bedrooms. It has actually sitting very strong and hard on our palm. So this is what some points I wanted to make from my side. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nishant. It is not a myth. It is very much there in our homes and in our palms. How interesting as a concept. Isha, your response to what Nishant has said. 2 minutes, your time starts now.
So absolutely, it is sitting on your palms. And in fact, the meeting that we're having here today is also a result of a globalized world where, connections are possible despite pandemic or not pandemic, whatever the reality may be. I have two major points, three major points to, put forth from what you said. One is that, so what you said about that Greta Thunberg, we don't need her, but that's, the point is that such consciences, whatever the word, but such realities exist, people exist, movements exist, and the world is coming together as a result of that, right? But just that there is very little of it, right? So it's not a reality that we don't want, we want more and more of that reality. The second thing is, you said, you spoke a lot about the differences between how the Eastern world and the Western world functions. But I think there has been scientific evidence now to show that no matter where you're from, what language you speak, what culture you come from, at the end of the day, it is social networks it is your connectivity with people around you that makes a difference to, your mental well-being and happiness, etc. So even as we harp on, the differences and how these differences have kind of got jumbled, with the globalized world, but the point is that at the heart of it, there are certain, very, very strong commonalities which are actually driving, the part of the globalization that hasn't happened enough, right? The third thing is that while you speak a lot about globalization has done this, it's done that, it's created more medical disorders, etc. I have a simple submission to you. How are you going to empirically test this? What is an operational definition of globalization? So there is a causality by association, but this is not causality in terms of cause and effect as we understand causality, because and that is because there are these very, very complicated evolutionary dynamics that are determining how these mechanisms move forward, right? It is not about capital gains in one part of the world determining how many kids get picked up with ADHD in another part of the world. We cannot draw, such linear causality from these associations. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that. And this really comes to a stage where we need to bring the focus back on children and childhood, rather than allow the discussion to go in the direction of geopolitics. The first question is from Suchitra Narayan. I would request both of you to respond to this, Nishant first and then Isha. Suchitra says that there is a huge conflict between modernization and globalization and the ravage to nature and the disconnect of nature, creating a world that is so tech-driven on the one hand, and the need for slow life and minimalism on the other hand. And this seems to have a great impact on culture, on childhood. And she quotes Finland, that has gone the other way of taking away subjects even from high school. And many of the European countries do not get into learning principles very early, unlike the preoccupation with early childhood education now to focus so much on readiness skills. And so there is this whole controversy on learning and child development. And your comments on this, Nishant, and then Isha?
Sir, definitely, I would agree with the fact that modernization or globalization, they're actually creating a lot of conflict. And this is what I was trying to make the point about. And we have started to understand. And that is why we are gradually reminded of, or we are reminding ourselves, or becoming minimalistic, or getting away from this or getting away from that. But we need to learn to develop a balance between giving away something and taking something. You are giving away with some subjects, but what you are taking from people around you, or the mobile phone in your hands, so that we have to actually look into. And it's not only about taking one point of the situation. We have to learn to derive balance of what we have to learn, or what we have to unlearn or de-learn in the process of understanding things around us. This is my submission, sir. Over to you, Isha.
Right. Isha, I want you to respond to this and combine it with another question that has come on chat, which is that we live in a world where a viral picture of a floating body of a Kurdish child on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea raises voices for child rights and their mental health worldwide, but at the same time allowing global players to use nations as their playground for armed conflicts for the sake of control of natural resources, quoting Iraq, Syria, and Afghanistan, to name a few. And how do we move forward for a global mental health in this tech-driven globe? So the critical point, and it's linked to the previous question, is the tech-driven globe and mental health. Isha, your responses?
Yes, sir. I think that's, so this entire technology drive that seems to be, positively on some accounts, but especially when it comes to children, obviously, the negative consequences way surpass, anything positive that it is doing for children. And I would especially like to bring in here, although, both the questions kind of, tread across countries and try to bring in perspectives like that. But let me make my point with a simple thing that we are seeing happening around us these days, and which is about what the pandemic has done to schooling, right? And the pandemic has done to schooling is that it has converted even whatever little experiential reality there was to the gain of knowledge, to the exchange of processes. All of that seems to have been transported to slideshows and PowerPoint presentations, and not something that is learning friendly at all. So yes, that this entire that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make, that we are submitting too much to technology and economic drives without actually integrating it with our ever-changing reality. Now, the pandemic is not the same reality as wanting to have this kind of a conversation, but we seem to think that just because this is the only access we have, we must use this platform. So I completely agree with both the questions, that technology-driven worlds are creating a big problem for children, and certainly, a pertinent case in point where we really need to look at integration mechanisms of bringing in reality, children's actual existences in their households, in their families, in their larger cultures, and then, develop technology-based or unbased solutions, doesn't matter, but certainly more real solutions that will make sense to them.
And with that, it's my privilege to let you know that officially Monday Moods has gone international. We have Dr. Mayuru, who has joined us from the Sri Lanka College of Child Psychiatrists. So welcome, and thank you very much for providing an international face to Monday Moods. Before I ask Anand Singh, who has his hand raised, let me put a quick question to you, Nishant. This is a question from Saurabh. I will paraphrase the question to its critical point. If someone's mental health issue is depression, how can the mental distress be addressed solely from a medical perspective when one considers that there is a pandemic, there is collapsing employment opportunities, there's alienation from family and friends? Don't we also need to address weak social infrastructure that has contributed to poor mental health? This question, of course, is predicated on a thesis that Saurav has presented, which is there on chat for all of you to read. Your comments, Nishant?
Sir, in very simple words, this is what I was talking about. We are medicalizing the processes. We are medicalizing, we are giving a medical name to the emotions, the thoughts which are coming in to our mind. So treating or understanding depression as an illness, we have to understand the processes behind it, where cultural, social, economic, and the medical part of it, everything has to come into picture. So this is my understanding about it, sir. Over to you.
Right. Anand, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you for giving an opportunity, sir. So, my name is Ansi. I'm basically from Bangalore itself. Right. I met Nishant sir personally in Ranchi CIT along with my son, Advi. So my question is very simple, each and everything having its own pros and cons.
Right.
How we can use technology to improve our kids? Not make them fully dependent on the technology, but at that time when we want to improve them, how we should use and what we should be thin line in our mind when we are doing that.
And indeed, Anand, it resonates quite a bit with the issue that Gaurang has also put on chat, that online education due to the pandemic is a big tool in various aspects of child development as well as vulnerability. So it's like a double-edged sword. Isha, your comments?
Yes, I think the answer actually lies in the concept that Nishant has been trying to make us all believe, McDonaldization, right? Because see, what has technology become to a lot of kids and parents is a quick fix, right? And that is what, the entire concept of McDonaldization is about. It's about instant gratification. It's about something so powerful that is capable of hijacking the child's reward pathway and taking it to a level where nothing else compares, right? So it actually starts with, when we let our 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds look at the mobile phone as if, it's something that is that can be used, that, they are given to whenever they cry, that they are given whenever they are bored, so it's actually this quick fix bit where the problem starts, right? And unfortunately, so many times I find myself wanting for alternatives when we are working with adolescents, right? Because the thing is that these are gadgets that ride on the dopamine systems of the brain. And so when we talk to adolescents about engaging otherwise, they're literally looking at us and saying, like, what do you mean? What is there that, kind of gives me a similar amount of engagement, similar amount of speed, so the problem actually happens, where probably neurobiologically a lot of change has already happened by the time we realize it's a problem. So that would be one slippery slope that actually has to rest on prevention, rather than trying to address it when a lot of damage has already been done.
Thank you very much, Isha. And of course, Deepti raises the whole issue, particularly in the pandemic, of what has happened to children who have been in a lockdown situation, particularly young children or perhaps special needs children. And she's been reading something called caging, that you've not seen the face of another human being, and development and learning being a social experience. As we said the last time, what's going to happen to the development of the 4, 5, and 6 years old as we emerge from this pandemic? Thank you very much for your participation. And before I hand over to Sheila to close the session, just to let you know what Utkarsh says, that we need to look at ourselves, adults, how we use technology, and what kind of a model we present towards children. And Nishant, a final 2 sentences from you, and then from Isha, and then I'll invite Sheila to close the session. Nishant, your final thoughts, your parting thoughts.
We are social animals. We have to, I completely agree with Utkarsh that we have to look into ourselves, how we are actually using the technology before teaching us to our young ones. Sir. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Isha?
Yes, I think that's a larger point that I was trying to make, that let's not take something just because it's in front of us. I think also something that you constantly keep telling us, the more nuanced we, take everything around us as, the more we try to get into experiences and try to understand them at different levels, the more it helps us to use them correctly and not be adversely affected by them. Thank you.
Right. And while people are expressing their consternation and concern about the blue rays that come out of the mobile phone, and Gaurang, as always, appreciates the knowledge feast that has come today. Thank you very much, Nishant and Nisha, for rigorous preparation for this session with some really deep frameworking and thinking. And I hand you over to Sheila to basically close the session.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shekhar, as always, for chairing in ways that were so engaging. But what a fun and fascinating evening. Thank you, Dr. Nishant and Dr. Isha. More than thank you for unpacking what is actually an exceedingly complex and highly debatable issue. But I see that a lot of our audience has been for, against, somewhere in between, a little bit diplomatic in part, with some loyalties to both sides. With that, we will leave you all to continue the debates in your head between your friends and family and professionals, and through the rest of the week. Thank you all for being on Monday Moods with Samvad. We really appreciate that you take the most difficult evening of the week to do some more. And I really believe that Dr. Isha and Dr. Nishant have made this fun and a light evening, although a deep one. So we will see you in February again, the second Monday of February and the fourth Monday of February. I believe we will be bringing you a completely different issue next month. We are going to be focusing on substance abuse in children and adolescents but we're going to bring you 2 sessions that take a strongly intervention perspective. So practitioners of mental health, we hope you will join us next month on some of those sessions. Thank you all and good night on behalf of Team SAMVAD.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.